The Grand Assembly Hall on Varanthos Prime was the largest enclosed space ever built by any civilization in the known galaxy. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it, drifting between the pillars of white stone that lined the chamber on all sides. 42 delegations sat in a wide half-circle, each in chairs designed for their particular body type. Some were tall and narrow, some were wide and low to the ground. One was filled with a warm liquid because the Ulu could not survive outside water for more than a few minutes at a time. At the far end of the chamber, in a modest pair of seats that had been added only 11 standard cycles ago, sat the human delegation. Ambassador Danny Callahan was not an impressive-looking man. He was average height, with thinning brown hair and a face that looked like it had spent too many years squinting into the sun. He had grown up on a farm in Ohio, and there was still something of that life in the way he carried himself. Unhurried, patient, and quiet. He wore a simple dark suit. No medals, no decorations. He sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him and watched the proceedings with the calm attention of a man who had learned long ago that listening was more useful than talking. Beside him sat Captain Laura Griffin. She was his chief advisor and his opposite in almost every way. She was tall, sharp-featured, and carried herself with the rigid discipline of someone who had spent 20 years in the Terran Navy. Her eyes moved constantly across the chamber, reading faces and body language the way a pilot reads instruments. She had a tablet in front of her, and every few minutes she would tap something on it and slide it toward Danny without a word. Most of that time had been filled with the voices of the elder races, the Corvalli, the Shen, the Phalori, debating trade quotas and resource agreements. It was dull, procedural work, and Danny sat through it without complaint. Then the Tessic ambassador asked to speak. The Tessic were a small species, insectoid in shape, with thin limbs and large reflective eyes that made them look permanently startled. Their ambassador was called Vreth, and when he rose to address the chamber, his voice was barely above a whisper. The translation system carried it to every seat, but it could not hide the fear beneath the words. Vreth explained that the Dravari hegemony had moved warships into 3 neutral border systems. These systems were home to the Tessic, the Olu, and the Vrathi. None of them had been consulted. None of them had been warned. Dravari patrols had already begun stopping civilian ships and demanding identification. 2 Tessic trading vessels had been boarded and searched. Vreth placed both of his forelimbs on the podium to steady himself. He asked the council for help. He asked for a joint peacekeeping fleet to be sent to the border systems. He said his people could not defend themselves alone. When he finished, the chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then High Regent Zorath of the Dravari hegemony stood. Zorath was enormous. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark green scales that caught the light like polished stone. His voice was deep and unhurried, and it carried the weight of a civilization that had been conquering its neighbors for longer than most species had been capable of space travel. He dismissed Vreth's concerns with a wave of one massive clawed hand. He called the border systems a Dravari matter. He said the patrols were routine security operations. He suggested that the Tessic ambassador was exaggerating out of ignorance and fear. He sat down. Danny watched all of this. Laura slid the tablet toward him again. On it was a summary of intelligence gathered by Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Network. The data was clear. The Dravari had moved more than 60 warships into the border region over the past 3 cycles. Supply lines were being established. Ground forces were being staged on transport carriers. This was not a security operation. This was the early phase of an invasion. Danny read the report. He looked at Laura. She gave a small nod. He pressed the button on his desk that requested the floor. When the system recognized him, a few of the elder delegates shifted in their seats. Humanity was still new here. When the human ambassador spoke, it was usually to ask questions or to offer modest proposals. Danny had never raised his voice in the chamber. Some of the older races privately considered him unremarkable. Danny stood. He thanked the chair for recognizing him. Then he addressed the full council in a calm and steady voice. He said that Earth had reviewed the situation in the border systems. He said that the intelligence available to his government suggested that the Dravari military buildup was not routine. He said that the Tessic, the Ulu, and the Vrothi were facing a genuine threat to their sovereignty. Then he asked his question. Will this council vote to deploy a joint peacekeeping fleet to the border systems? The question hung in the air. The Corvalli ambassador, a tall being with silvery skin and 4 narrow eyes, spoke first. She expressed concern, but noted that the Corvalli economy was under strain. Deploying a fleet would be expensive. She abstained. The Shen ambassador, a heavy-set creature wrapped in ceremonial robes, said that the Shen Federation did not believe this matter fell within its area of responsibility. He declined. The Phalori Collective, speaking through a shared voice that emerged from a cluster of small glowing organisms, expressed deep sympathy for the Tessic people. They offered thoughts and solidarity. They did not offer ships. One by one, around the chamber, the answer came back the same. Abstain. Decline. Sympathize, but do nothing. Danny listened to every response. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. When the last delegation had spoken, he stood once more. Thank you, he said. Earth appreciates the council's honesty. He paused. The chamber waited. Earth will remember this day, he said. He did not explain what he meant. He did not raise his voice. He simply gathered his tablet, nodded to Laura, and the two of them walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall before the session had officially ended. No one tried to stop them. In the corridor outside, Laura fell into step beside him. Their footsteps echoed on the polished stone floor. That went about how we expected, she said. Danny nodded. Get me a secure line to Megan Holt. We need to talk about the next phase. Laura pulled out her communicator and began making the call. Behind them, through the heavy doors of the assembly hall, the council continued its session. But a strange unease had settled over the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances. The Tessic ambassador sat motionless in his seat, staring at the empty chairs where the humans had been. No one can say exactly why, but the room felt different now. Something had shifted, and not one of them could name it. The Grand Assembly Hall had never been this full. Every seat was taken. Every aisle was lined with aides, advisors, officers, and observers from all 42 member species. The gallery above the main floor, usually reserved for journalists and scholars, was packed shoulder to shoulder. The air recyclers hummed at full power, struggling to keep up with the body heat of so many different species crammed into one space. The Dravari holographic projection still dominated the center of the room. High Regent Zorath had kept his channel open, his massive image flickering above the floor, watching the proceedings with the lazy confidence of a conqueror. Then the doors at the far end of the chamber opened. Danny Callahan walked in first. He was not wearing a suit this time. He wore the dark gray uniform of the Terran Unified Command, simple, undecorated, and perfectly pressed. Behind him came Laura Griffin, her posture rigid, her eyes already scanning the room. Behind her came Megan Holt, the secretary of the Terran Unified Command, walking with the quiet authority of someone who has spent a lifetime making decisions that others only read about. Then came Commander Nate Herrera, broad-shouldered and calm. And finally, Dr. Claire Dunham, the linguist, small and unassuming, carrying a data tablet against her chest like a shield. The five of them walked down the center aisle of the Grand Assembly Hall in silence. Their boots clicked against the stone floor in unison. Every eye in the chamber followed them. Every voice fell quiet. Danny reached the podium and stopped. He did not smile. He did not greet the delegates. He looked out at the chamber with the same steady patience he had shown on the day he walked out. But something was different now. There was weight behind his eyes. The weight of decisions made and consequences accepted. Earth has received the Council's invitation, he said. His voice was calm, clear, and carried to every corner without effort. We appreciate the gesture, but Earth is not here to accept an invitation. He paused. Earth is here to present its terms. A murmur ran through the chamber. Zorat's holographic image shifted, the great reptilian head tilting slightly to one side. Danny continued without raising his voice. First, Earth will assume direct oversight of all galactic infrastructure systems that it originally built or maintained. This includes the Deep Space Relay Network, the Navigational Survey Program, the Medical Research Initiatives, and the translation systems. These systems will remain operational for the benefit of all Council species, but they will be managed by Earth. No more working in the background. No more building your civilization while you pretend we are not in the room. The Shen ambassador opened his mouth to speak. Danny looked at him, and the Shen ambassador closed his mouth. Second, the Dravari hegemony will withdraw all military forces from Tessic space within one standard cycle. All occupied territory will be returned. All prisoners will be released. This is not a request. Zorat's image leaned forward. His voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. And who will enforce this demand, Ambassador? You? Your little farming world? Danny did not answer. He looked at Laura. Laura Griffin stepped to the podium, placed her communicator on the surface, and pressed a single button. Every display screen in the Grand Assembly Hall activated at once. They showed a single live feed, transmitted from the edge of Dravari-occupied Tessic space. The image was clear and sharp. It showed open space, black and empty, dotted with the distant light of stars. And then the ships appeared. They came out of the dark like ghosts, massive gray shapes shedding their stealth fields one by one, each vessel lighting up on the display as its systems went active. First 10, then 50, then 100. Carriers the size of small moons. Battleships bristling with weapons that gleamed under running lights that had been dark for months. Support vessels, medical frigates, troop transports, and electronic warfare platforms. Row after row after row, stretching back into the void until the sensors could not count them all. 400 warships, the Terran Third Fleet. Commander Nate Herrera's voice came through the speakers, broadcast live from the bridge of the fleet's flagship. It was the same voice that had coordinated the quiet withdrawal of human engineers and doctors. Steady, professional, and completely without fear. Terran Third Fleet standing by, he said. The chamber did not erupt. It did not shout or argue or protest. It went absolutely, perfectly still. Zorat stared at the screens. His yellow eyes moved from ship to ship, counting, calculating. His jaw tightened. The confidence that had sat so easily on his face a moment ago was gone, replaced by something he had not felt in a very long time. He sat down without a word. Danny presented the third condition. The Council will be restructured. The old system of rank based on the age of a civilization is finished. From this day forward, representation on this Council will be based on contribution. Not how long your species has existed. Not how many wars you have fought. But what you have given to the collective welfare of every species in this room. He looked at the Corvalli ambassador. Sethal met his gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Danny stepped back from the podium. The chamber was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The Corvalli ambassador stared at the fleet on the display, her four faded eyes wide. She turned to the Shen ambassador beside her and whispered something. The Shen ambassador did not respond. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands flat on the table in front of him, staring at nothing. And then, Slowly, the horror began to spread through the chamber. It was not the fleet that frightened them. The Dravari had a powerful navy. The Shen had warships. Even the Corvalli maintained a respectable defense force. A large fleet was impressive, but it was not, on its own, terrifying. What was terrifying was what the fleet represented. Earth had built this fleet while running the galaxy's communication network, while mapping its trade routes, while staffing its hospitals, and translating its languages, and feeding its supply chains. Earth had done all of that work, the invisible, thankless, endless labor that kept civilization functioning. And at the same time, quietly, without anyone noticing, it had assembled the most powerful military force the region had ever seen. The resources required to do both were staggering. The planning, the discipline, the industrial capacity. It was beyond anything the elder races had imagined possible, from a species that had only been in space for a few centuries. They had looked at humanity and seen a useful junior partner. A species that was good with its hands, that worked hard, that did not complain. They had been grateful for the help, in the way one is grateful for a reliable piece of machinery, appreciative but never truly respectful. Now they understood. Humanity had never been the junior partner. Humanity had never been the newcomer learning how things worked. Humanity had been the foundation, the one holding everything up. And they had done it so quietly, so competently, and so completely that no one had realized the truth until they let go. And even then, even while walking away, even while the galaxy crumbled, they had been building. Danny Callahan stood at the podium one last time. He looked out at the silent, stunned chamber, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet. Earth walked away, so that you could see what the galaxy looks like without us. Now you know. He paused. The silence was absolute. We are not asking for your gratitude. We are not asking for your approval. We are telling you how it is going to be from now on. You can join us at this table as equals, or you can watch from the gallery. But the days of Earth doing your work in the shadows while you pretend we do not matter, those days are over. No one objected. No one raised a hand. No one spoke. Then from the far side of the chamber, Ambassador Vreth rose from his seat. The Tessic ambassador was small and frail. His thin limbs shook as he stood. His people were under occupation. His homeworld was burning. He had begged this same chamber for help and been ignored. He had watched the galaxy forget about his people while arguing about tradition and procedure. He walked across the chamber floor. Every eye followed him. He stopped in front of Danny Callahan and looked up at the human with those large, reflective eyes. Then Vreth raised both forelimbs and placed them gently on Danny's shoulders. In Tessic culture, it was the most sacred gesture one being could offer another. It was a vow of eternal debt, a promise that the giver and all their descendants would remember the receiver's name for as long as the Tessic existed as a people. Danny looked at the small, trembling creature in front of him. He reached up and placed his hand over one of Vreth's forelimbs, gently, carefully, the way you would hold something precious. He nodded. No words were needed. The galaxy had changed. Everyone in that chamber knew it. The balance of power had shifted, not through war, not through conquest, but through the simple and devastating act of walking away and letting the silence speak. And somewhere beyond the edge of Tessic space, 400 ships of the Terran Third Fleet held their positions in perfect formation, dark, patient, and absolutely unafraid, waiting for whatever came next. The Dravari invasion of the Tessic homeworld began on a quiet morning. There was no warning, no final ultimatum. High Regent Zorath simply gave the order, and 60 warships crossed the border in a single coordinated wave. The Tessic Defense Fleet, a collection of outdated patrol ships and converted cargo haulers, tried to form a line. They held it for 11 minutes. The battle, if it could be called that, was over in less than 2 hours. The Tessic fleet was scattered. Their orbital defense platforms were destroyed. Dravari landing craft descended on the capital city before the dust had settled. Ambassador Vreth was in his quarters on Varanthos Prime when the news reached him. He received a transmission from the Tessic military command. Broken, full of static, barely coherent. The voice on the other end told him that Dravari ground forces were moving through the streets. Civilians were being rounded up. The government had fled to underground shelters. Then the transmission cut out. Vreth sat in the silence for a long time. His thin forelimbs trembled. Then he stood and walked to the Grand Assembly Hall. He was not the only one. For the first time in living memory, the council called a full emergency session. Every delegation was present. The chamber was packed. Aides and advisors lined the walls. The atmosphere was thick with tension and something close to panic. Every delegation was present except one. The human seats were empty. High Regent Zorath attended the session by holographic projection. His massive image floated above the chamber floor, green scales gleaming, yellow eyes half closed with satisfaction. He addressed the council with the ease of someone who knew he had already won. He declared the Tessic homeworld a Dravari protectorate. He called it a natural extension of Dravari territory. He said the Tessic people would be treated fairly under Dravari law, provided they did not resist. He said that any council member who objected was welcome to send their fleet to challenge him. He waited. The chamber was silent. The Shen ambassador looked at his hands. The Phalori murmured among themselves, their shared voice too quiet to carry. The smaller delegations, the Vrathi, the Olu, the dozen minor species who depended on the council for protection, sat frozen in their seats, wondering if they would be next. Zorath smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching prey that had forgotten how to run. Then the Corvalli ambassador stood. Her name was Sethal. She was old by Corvalli standards. Her silver skin faded to a pale gray. Her 4 eyes clouded at the edges. She had served on the council for 30 cycles. She had watched humanity arrive, take its modest seat, and quietly begin doing the work that nobody else wanted to do. She had voted to abstain when Danny Callahan asked for help. She had regretted it every day since. Now she stood in the center of the chamber and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner. She did not address Zorath. She did not address the crisis. She addressed the empty human seats. "We made a mistake," she said. "We made it together, and we have all paid for it. Our shipping lanes are dark. Our communication networks are fractured. Our hospitals are failing. Our people are frightened." She paused and let the words settle. "We did this to ourselves. When the humans asked us to stand together, we chose to sit. When they asked us to act, we chose to abstain. We treated them as the youngest and least important voice in this chamber, and we were wrong." Murmurs rippled through the delegations. The Shen ambassador shifted uncomfortably. Sethal continued, "I am placing a formal motion before this council. I propose that we invite the human delegation to return, not as a junior member, but as a senior partner with full veto authority over council decisions." The chamber erupted. The Shen ambassador was on his feet immediately. He called the proposal an insult to every species that had sat on the council for centuries before humanity had even left its home planet. The Phalori expressed concern about setting a precedent. 3 of the smaller delegations protested that they had not been consulted. Sethal let them talk. She let them shout and argue and wave their limbs. Then she raised one long silver hand, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Tradition did not map our shipping lanes. Tradition did not write our translation codes. Tradition did not develop the treatment for the Tessic plague. Humans did. And we let them walk away because we were too proud and too blind to see what they were worth. Her clouded eyes moved from face to face, from species to species. "Look at us," she said. "Look at what we have become without them. We cannot move our ships safely. We cannot speak to each other clearly. We cannot feed our people or heal our sick. And now the Dravari have invaded a sovereign world, and we sit here arguing about tradition." The chamber fell quiet. "I call for a vote," Sethal said. The vote was close. Several delegations abstained. A handful voted against. But when the count was finished, the motion passed. By a margin of 3 votes, the Galactic Council agreed to invite humanity back on new terms. The formal message was drafted and transmitted to Earth within the hour. It was long, carefully worded, and filled with diplomatic language that tried to make the invitation sound like a gesture of respect, rather than an act of desperation. The message traveled through the remnants of the interstellar communication network. It bounced between relay stations that were still functioning, was delayed twice by routing errors that would not have happened if the human network were still online, and finally reached the steadfast 6 hours after it was sent. Lieutenant Katie Park received it at her station. She read it once, then read it again. Then she forwarded it to Laura Griffin. Laura read it standing at the central console, her face expressionless. She forwarded it to Danny Callahan. Danny received the message in his quarters on the Meridian. He was sitting at his desk, eating a sandwich and reading intelligence reports. He set the sandwich down and opened the file. He read the council's invitation. He read the terms: senior partner, full veto authority, a formal acknowledgement of humanity's contributions to galactic infrastructure. He read the signatures of every delegation that had voted in favor. He sat with it for a long time. The room was quiet. Outside the viewport, stars drifted slowly past. Then he called Laura. "They are asking us to come back," he said. Laura's voice came through the speaker, calm and measured as always. "I saw the message. What do you think?" There was a pause. Danny could hear the faint hum of the steadfast systems in the background. "The question," Laura said, "is not whether they want us back. The question is whether we should go." Danny leaned back in his chair. He thought about the Tessic homeworld under Dravari occupation. He thought about Dr. Ben Aldridge, sitting in his lab, unable to help. He thought about Claire Dunham and her translation algorithms, about the ships lost in the Miravan corridor, about the thousands of small and large ways that humanity had held the galaxy together without anyone noticing. He thought about Megan Holt and the fleet, 400 warships that had been assembling in secret for the past 2 cycles, hidden in the deep void between stars, running without lights or active sensors, invisible to every detection system in the galaxy. "We go back," Danny said, "but not the way they expect." He ended the call and opened a new channel. This one was encrypted at the highest level available to the Terran Unified Command. "Megan," he said, "it is time." On the other end of the channel, Megan Holt smiled for the first time in months. "I will give the order," she said. And somewhere in the black emptiness between the stars, 400 ships began to move. The Shen freighter Golrath's Dream dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Miravan corridor and immediately found itself in trouble. The corridor was a well-known trade route that passed through a dense region of asteroid clusters and gravitational anomalies. For the past 8 cycles, human survey teams had mapped every rock, every drift pattern, and every gravity well in the region. They updated the charts every 30 days. Ships that used those charts could fly through the corridor at full speed with almost no risk. But the charts had not been updated in 60 days. The human survey ships were gone. The captain of the Golrath's Dream, a Shen named Prahl, saw the warning on his navigation screen too late. An asteroid cluster had shifted position since the last chart update. It was now sitting directly in the flight path. Prahl pulled the ship hard to the left, avoiding the largest rocks, but a smaller fragment struck the cargo bay and tore through the hull. The ship limped to the nearest Shen outpost. The cargo, 300 tons of refined mineral ore, bound for a Corvalli manufacturing hub, was lost. It was the fourth ship the Shen had lost in the corridor that cycle. At the Shen Border Command Station, the officers stared at their outdated charts and tried to figure out what to do. They had their own survey ships, but they were slow and poorly equipped compared to the human vessels. Mapping the corridor properly would take them months. In the meantime, ships would either have to slow to a crawl or risk destruction. The Shen ambassador sent a formal request to Earth, asking for the survey data. The request was acknowledged. A response came back 2 days later. It said that the navigational data was proprietary information belonging to the Terran Survey Corps, and was no longer available for distribution to non-allied governments. The Phalori Collective faced a different kind of crisis. The Phalori were a communal species. They thought and spoke as groups, not individuals. Their language was extraordinarily complex, layered with meaning that shifted depending on the number of speakers, the temperature of the room, and a dozen other factors that most species could not even detect. Communicating with other races had always been difficult for them. 7 cycles ago, a human linguist named Dr. Claire Dunham had solved the problem. She had spent 3 years living among the Phalori, studying their language, and she had developed a translation algorithm that could convert Phalori speech into something other species could understand. The algorithm was brilliant. It accounted for all the variables that made Phalori communication so difficult, and it did so in real time. Within a year of its deployment, the Phalori had gone from being one of the most isolated species in the Council to one of the most active. Claire and her team maintained the algorithm, updating it as the Phalori language naturally evolved. When the withdrawal order came, Claire had packed up her work and taken it with her. She was now stationed on a human research vessel in deep space, continuing her linguistic studies on her own. Without her updates, the translation algorithm began to drift. Small errors appeared. A word here, a phrase there. Most of the time, the meaning was close enough, but close enough was not always good enough. The incident between the Corvalli and the Varathi proved that. The two species had been negotiating a minor trade agreement. The Corvalli offered a standard set of terms. The Varathi, speaking through the degraded translation system, received a version of those terms that made it sound like the Corvalli were demanding exclusive access to Varathi mining rights. The Varathi ambassador, a proud and easily offended being, stood up and accused the Corvalli of imperial ambition. The argument escalated. Warships were mentioned. By the time a Phalori mediator realized the translation error and corrected it, both sides had recalled their ambassadors. It took 2 weeks to repair the damage. 2 weeks of frantic diplomacy, all because a human software patch had not been applied. But the worst crisis, the one that kept Danny Callahan awake at night, was happening on the Tessic homeworld. The Tessic plague was called the Viridian Wasting. It attacked the nervous system, slowly shutting down motor functions until the victim could no longer move, eat, or breathe. It had been killing Tessic for decades, and no Tessic scientist had been able to find a cure. Dr. Ben Aldridge had come close. Ben was a xenobiologist from a small town in Virginia. He was not a loud man or a dramatic one. He was the kind of person who stayed late in the lab, who read papers on his days off, who forgot to eat when he was working on a problem. He had spent 4 cycles on the Tessic homeworld, studying the plague, and he had identified a protein in Tessic biology that the disease used as a gateway. He was 6 months away from a working treatment when the recall order came. Ben had argued against it. He had stood in Laura Griffin's office on the Steadfast and told her that people were dying. Laura had looked at him with those cold, steady eyes and told him that she understood, but the order came from above both of them. Now Ben sat in a small lab on the human colony ship Meridian. staring at his research files. The protein was mapped. The treatment pathway was clear. He could finish the work in months if he were allowed to go back. He was not allowed to go back. On the Tessic homeworld, the death toll rose. Ambassador Vreth sent message after message to Earth, each one more desperate than the last. The Tessic government offered anything: trade agreements, territory, political support, in exchange for the return of the human medical team. The messages were received. They were read. They were filed. Danny Callahan read every one of them. He sat alone in his office, and he felt the weight of every life that was being lost while he waited. He was not a cruel man. He had not chosen this path because he enjoyed watching others suffer. He had chosen it because the Council had taught him a lesson on the day they refused to help, and now he was teaching that lesson back. Megan was the secretary of the Terran Unified Command, the highest-ranking civilian authority in Earth's government after the president. She was a lean woman with gray hair cut short, and a face that gave away nothing. "How long?" Danny asked her. Megan looked at the reports. The Corvalli economy was in freefall. The Shen had lost 12 ships. The Phalori were struggling to communicate with anyone. The Tessic were begging. And the Dravari, the species that had started all of this, were still advancing. Their warships now controlled 5 systems in the border region. High Regent Zorath had given a public address in which he mocked the Council's inability to act. He had called the elder races toothless creatures who speak of justice but have never bled for it. He had not mentioned humanity. Danny noticed that. "A little longer," Megan said. He thought about the Tessic ambassador, that fragile insectoid creature who had stood before the Council and begged for help. He thought about the silence that had answered him. "A little longer," Danny agreed. He ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere in Tessic space, another family lost someone to the Viridian wasting. Somewhere in the Miravan corridor, another ship flew blind to an asteroid field. Somewhere on Varanthos Prime, another diplomatic argument turned ugly because the words did not come through right. And somewhere in deep space, 400 human warships drifted in silence, their running lights dark, their weapons cold, waiting for an order that had not yet been given. The galaxy was falling apart, and the species that could put it back together was sitting in the dark, watching and saying nothing. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Corvalli orbital station above the planet Dreshen. A maintenance crew of 6 human engineers had been assigned there for the past 4 cycles, keeping the station's atmospheric recyclers running and its power grid stable. They were quiet, reliable people who did their work without complaint. The Corvalli barely noticed them most of the time. Then one morning, without warning, the crew packed their tools, boarded their shuttle, and left. The station commander sent a message to Earth's liaison office asking when the replacement crew would arrive. The response came back the same day. It was polite and brief. It said that Earth was reallocating its engineering personnel and that no replacement crew would be sent. It thanked the Corvalli for the opportunity to serve. Within 2 days, the atmospheric recyclers on Dreshen Station began to malfunction. The Corvalli maintenance staff looked at the systems and realized they did not fully understand how the human modifications worked. The humans had improved the recyclers far beyond their original specifications. They ran cleaner, quieter, and more efficiently than anything the Corvalli had built themselves. But the documentation was stored on human servers, and access had been revoked. The same thing happened on a medical station in Shen space. A team of human doctors and researchers had been working alongside Shen physicians to develop treatments for a respiratory illness common among Shen children. The program had been running for 6 cycles and had saved thousands of lives. The human team left in a single day. They took their research with them. They left behind a polite note wishing their Shen colleagues well. Captain Laura Griffin managed the withdrawal from the bridge of the Steadfast, a Terran command vessel stationed in deep space. The ship was not large by galactic standards, but it was fast, well-armed, and equipped with the most advanced communications array in the human fleet. Laura stood at the central console, reviewing reports as they came in from dozens of locations across Council space. Commander Nate Herrera stood beside her, coordinating fleet movements. Nate was a stocky man with a thick neck and a calm voice that never seemed to change, no matter how bad the news was. He had served with Laura for 8 years, and the two of them worked together with the kind of efficiency that came from long practice and mutual trust. Corvalli Trade Hub at Fenrath is asking why our cargo ships are not docking, Nate said, reading from his screen. Because they have been rerouted, Laura said. Next. Shen Border Command wants to know why our relay stations have gone dark in their sector. Because we turned them off. Next. The Fealori are sending formal diplomatic protests through every channel they have. Laura did not look up from her console. Forward them to Sam. Sam Beckett was the junior diplomat Earth had left behind on Varanthos Prime. He was 29 years old, red-haired, and had a friendly smile that made people trust him even when he was telling them things they did not want to hear. His job was simple. He was there to answer questions without actually answering anything. The Corvalli ambassador found him in the diplomatic quarter 3 days after the withdrawal began. She was tall and moved with the careful grace of someone who is used to being the most important person in any room. Her 4 silver eyes locked onto Sam as she approached. "What is Earth doing?" she asked. "Earth is reallocating its resources to better serve its national interests, Ambassador." "That is not an answer. It is the answer I have been authorized to give." The ambassador leaned closer. "Is Earth preparing for war?" Sam shook his head. "No, Ambassador. Earth has no hostile intentions toward any member of the Council." "Then why are you pulling your people out of our systems? Why are your ships leaving our ports? Why have your relay stations gone silent?" Sam kept his smile steady. "Earth has decided that its contributions to Council infrastructure are no longer sustainable at current levels. We are simply stepping back. There is nothing aggressive about it." The Corvalli ambassador stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Back on the Steadfast, Lieutenant Katie Park handled the flood of incoming communications. Katie was young, barely 26, with short dark hair and a quiet intensity that made people twice her age take her seriously. She sat at the communications station, with 3 screens open in front of her, sorting messages by priority. "We are getting requests from 14 different governments," she said to Laura. "Most of them want to know when services will be restored. Tell them we appreciate their patience, and that Earth will provide updates as they become available." Katie typed the response and sent it out. She paused. "Commander, the Tessic government is asking specifically about the medical research team. They say the plague situation on their homeworld is getting worse." Laura was quiet for a moment. She knew about the plague. She knew that Dr. Ben Aldridge and his team had been making real progress before the recall order came through. Ben had not wanted to leave. He had argued with Laura directly. She had told him the decision was not hers to make. "Same response," Laura said. "Earth appreciates their patience." Katie nodded and sent the message. She did not look happy about it. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into a full cycle. And slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to understand what it had lost. The human deep space relay network had carried nearly a third of all interstellar communications in the region. When it went dark, the effect was like cutting a major highway through a city. Traffic did not just slow down, it collapsed. Messages that once took minutes to cross between systems now took hours, sometimes days. Governments that relied on fast communication to coordinate trade, security, and diplomacy found themselves operating blind. The human trade fleet had been one of the largest independent merchant operations in the galaxy. Human ships carried everything from advanced construction materials to agricultural seed stock to medical supplies. They were fast, reliable, and cheap. When those ships stopped coming, prices on Corvallis and Shen markets doubled within weeks. Goods that had once been common became scarce. Factories slowed. Hospitals ran low on supplies. And through all of it, Earth said nothing. No threats, no demands, no ultimatums, just silence. Danny Callahan followed the reports from his office on the colony ship Meridian, orbiting a human settlement world far from Council space. He read every update Laura sent him. He studied the economic data, the diplomatic traffic, the intelligence reports from the border systems where the Dravari continued to build up their forces. He felt the weight of what he was doing. He knew people were suffering. He knew the Tessic were dying. He knew that good men like Ben Aldridge were sitting on their hands, wanting to help, being told they could not. But Danny also knew something else. He knew that for 11 cycles, humanity had given everything it had to the Council. It had built, healed, mapped, translated, supplied, and supported dozens of civilizations. And when humanity had asked for one thing, just one vote, one fleet, one act of collective courage, the Council had turned its back. So now, Earth would turn its back, not in anger, not in spite, but so that every species in the galaxy could feel in their own bones what a universe without humans looked like. Danny set down the report and looked out the window at the stars. A little longer, he said to himself.